I'm Jana Baker, 31, and I learned the hard way that in some families, love comes with an application process. When Matthew said his family was throwing a surprise party for his sister, I thought, great, cake, candles, awkward small talk, maybe a few harmless jabs about my startup. But the moment we stepped into the Caraway estate and Evelyn turned with that poised smile and said, "Let's hope this year the family makes better long-term choices," I knew. This wasn't just a party, it was an audition. The foyer alone screamed curated legacy. Walls lined with portraits of ancestors in oil, not photographs. A grand piano I'd never seen anyone play stood like a gatekeeper to the main room, where soft jazz and murmurs floated in the air like a warning. I followed Matthew inside, clutching the velvet box in my purse like it was a lifeline. The necklace, restored from pieces of his grandmother's original set, months of work gone into sourcing matching links and repairing the clasp. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Something that mattered. Something I hoped would say what words couldn't. I respect where you came from. I'm not here to steal your sun or your spotlight. But Evelyn's eyes swept over me like I was part of the catering team. "Jana, darling," she said, leaning in with that soft-voiced menace she'd perfected. "Lovely you could make it. Just in time for the evaluations." She laughed lightly as if she'd said something whimsical. But her eyes didn't laugh, neither did mine. The living room buzzed with carefully measured affection, hugs that didn't quite land, compliments edged with qualifiers. I recognized at least 3 board members from Evelyn's clinic and 1 senator she fundraised for. Amanda, Matthew's sister and the birthday girl, stood at the center of it all, glowing in a silk jumpsuit and flanked by people who mirrored her gestures like disciples. "She's the real legacy," Matthew whispered to me, half proud, half apologetic. "Don't I know it?" I said under my breath, forcing a smile as I approached the cluster of family and power brokers. "Matthew's girl," one of the women said, eyes flicking over my shoes, my neckline, my hesitation. "You're the one with what is it, the app?" I nodded. "Streamlining clinical admin, especially for overburdened practices like—" she interrupted, already turning away. "Interesting, it wasn't, not here, not yet." Evelyn took the floor just before dinner, her voice rising just enough to silence the room. "Before we celebrate Amanda, I want to thank everyone here for believing in legacy, in values, and in making sound choices, even when the flashy ones looked tempting." There was polite laughter. Then, silence. She looked straight at me. And I smiled. Wide. Because I was done auditioning. Let the show begin. I've always known the difference between invited and included. Matthew thinks it's the same thing. Says his mother wouldn't ask me to things if she didn't like me. But there's a difference between being allowed in the room and being welcomed at the table. I saw it in the guest list tonight. Elegant cards on the mantel with cursive names. Mine was missing. "Must have slipped through the mail," Evelyn said earlier with a thin smile, "the kind that stretches but never warms. Like the family photo shoot last Christmas." I showed up with 3 coordinating outfit options. They took the portraits 2 hours early. "We thought you'd canceled," Evelyn said that time too. Same with Amanda's engagement brunch. The email invite arrived 2 hours after the event ended. "Oh, tech glitch," Amanda claimed, smiling over champagne. "These weren't accidents. They were edits." Matthew used to chalk it up to forgetfulness. "My family's just scattered," he'd say, squeezing my hand. But it wasn't forgetfulness that kept Evelyn from RSVPing to our New Year's dinner last year, only to post from a gala the same night. It wasn't absent-mindedness that made Amanda laugh when I said I worked in digital health. "So, like, tech support for nurses?" she'd said, wine in hand, waiting for the room to laugh. And they did. Even Matthew. That was the first time I realized it, how carefully this family curated themselves. Polished, controlled, meticulous. I didn't fit. I was the creative one, which, in their world, was code for unreliable. I overheard Evelyn once talking to one of her donors at a fundraiser. "Matthew's partner is in tech," she said, very passionate. A little unstructured, you know the type. Passionate. Unstructured. Those were the words she used instead of unstable. Now, back at the party, I stood near the patio doorway watching as Evelyn poured someone a second glass of wine with the grace of a duchess. Amanda was holding court beside the cake, telling a story about a botched bachelorette party in Tulum that somehow ended with a private yacht. No one looked at me. I took a step back, letting the curtain fall between me and the party, and exhaled. It wasn't that I wanted to be them. I just wanted to stop being the variable. The thing they couldn't control. The one they couldn't explain in two neat sentences at cocktail parties. The outsider with too much vision and not enough pedigree. Matthew found me a few minutes later, balancing two flutes of champagne. "You okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, taking one. "Just needed a little air." He didn't press. He never did. Back inside, Evelyn's toast had begun. "To Amanda," she said, her voice smooth as ever. "A woman who embodies tradition, intelligence, and, most of all, discernment." Her eyes didn't flick to me this time. They didn't have to. I was already disappearing. But not for long. By the time dessert rolled out, my pulse was hammering in my throat. The velvet box in my purse felt heavier than it had all night, like it was absorbing every word, every look, every missed beat of belonging. I hadn't planned some big reveal. I wasn't looking to steal attention. But I'd spent 6 months tracking down missing pieces of this necklace. Decades-old records, specialty jewelers, endless back and forth with a restoration artist in Milan. It had belonged to Matthew's grandmother. Evelyn kept it locked in a drawer until a pipe burst last winter and flooded half the guest wing. That's when I saw it. Tangled, dulled, forgotten. Matthew mentioned how Amanda used to play dress-up in it as a kid, how she'd drape it over her stuffed animals and call them duchesses. So I asked Evelyn if I could try having it restored. She'd given me a clipped nod and said, "If you think you can make it worth something again." Tonight was supposed to be the final note in that melody. A way to say, "I see you. I see where you came from. I want to be part of it, not rewrite it." "Can I say something before the cake?" I asked quietly, stepping toward Amanda. She blinked. So did everyone else. "Of course," she said, motioning toward the center. I stood beside her, the box in my hand, and took a slow breath. "I know I'm not technically family," I began, eyes on Amanda, but voice aimed at the room. "But over the last few years, I've learned how much legacy matters here. How traditions are held close. How stories are passed down, not just in words, but in things." I opened the box gently, revealing the necklace. Delicate gold links, opal insets that shimmered faintly under the chandelier light. "This belonged to your grandmother," I said, offering it toward Amanda. "I had it restored. Not remade. Just brought back. It's still hers. Still yours. Just whole again." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then polite applause. A few nods. A smile from Amanda, small, unsure. "Wow," she said, taking the box. "That's really thoughtful." But the silence underneath was louder. Matthew reached for my hand. I let him. Evelyn's expression never changed, but I caught the flicker. There and gone. The twitch at the corner of her mouth before she sipped her wine. Then she said it. "Lovely story, Jana. Really." Her smile was soft, sharp, but some gestures feel transactional, don't they? The room exhaled, like a trigger had been released. Amanda looked down at the necklace like it had grown fangs. I didn't respond. I just stood there, holding on to Matthew's hand, nodding like I'd just been thanked instead of quietly dismissed. It didn't matter. They didn't have to understand. Because I hadn't given the necklace to win them over. I'd given it to remember who I was. And that was going to matter very, very soon. I was never supposed to pitch tonight. It was a party, not a boardroom. But Matthew had suggested I bring a demo anyway. Just in case, he'd said, like we were going to a job fair, not his sister's birthday. The truth? I'd wanted this. Not just for my startup, though, yes, the clinic Evelyn ran was the kind of anchor account that could turn us from a whisper to a conversation in medtech. But more than that, I wanted to show them I wasn't just some side project Matthew picked up after college. I could build something, fix something, be worth something. So when Amanda waved off the DJ and said, "Anyone else want to raise a glass or whatever?" Matthew nudged me. "Go on," he whispered. "They're listening now." And they were. I stepped into the den, now filled with scattered guests, a few board members from the clinic, and Evelyn seated perfectly poised on a leather settee like she was waiting to be unimpressed. I cleared my throat. Hi everyone, I'll keep this quick. I know this isn't a TED Talk, but I also know many of you work in or around healthcare, and, well, so do I. A few murmurs of interest. A raised brow. I tapped my phone, casting the interface of my platform onto the large screen behind me. It's called Neurotask. It's a streamlined admin solution built specifically for medical institutions like Caraway Clinic, designed to eliminate redundant paperwork, reduce burnout for staff, and increase compliance accuracy. A few nods. A woman in the back adjusted her glasses. We ran our pilot at a smaller clinic in West Covina. They saw a 37% drop in data entry errors in 6 weeks. That's not just savings, it's peace of mind, for doctors, for patients, for operations. I didn't fumble, I didn't stall, I knew my numbers, I knew the pain points. And then, just as I wrapped with the invitation to beta test a customized module for the Caraway Clinic, Evelyn set down her wine glass. Not everything, she said, in that same level tone she used when icing out realtors and interns, can be fixed with apps and charm. The room shifted. Some smiled awkwardly. Some looked down at their drinks. Matthew cleared his throat but said nothing. Amanda glanced between us like she was waiting for someone to change the subject. I stood there, heart thudding. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I just clicked off the screen, nodded once, and said, "Thank you for your time." Because I knew something Evelyn didn't. Charm can open doors, but silence can build walls. And I was done asking to be let in. I found the balcony by accident. 2 wrong turns and a desperate need to breathe. The second-floor hallway had been cleared of guests, and when I pushed open the old French doors, the night air hit me like a salve. Cold, sharp, real. I kicked off my heels and stepped into the quiet. The garden below buzzed with conversation. Distant laughter, clinking glasses. The sound of a party I was technically still invited to, but no longer part of. I pressed my hands to the railing and closed my eyes. There was a time when I'd have cried. Maybe even tonight, if it had been last year. Or the year before, when I was still trying to impress them. Still convincing myself that I just needed one more dinner, one more perfectly timed joke, one more carefully chosen dress. But I'd given them a necklace. I'd given them numbers. I'd given them everything I could wrap into a bow. And still, I was the risk, the variable. The one they'd never quite know what to do with. I didn't hear Matthew until he was beside me, hands in his pockets, looking down at the same garden I was pretending not to watch. "You disappeared," he said gently. "I needed air." "Yeah." He sighed. "Same." We stood in silence for a beat too long. "They weren't fair," he added finally. "About the pitch." I nodded. "They never are." He didn't answer that. Just shifted his weight like the ground under him wasn't quite stable. "Can we just not fight tonight?" he asked, his voice too soft, too careful. It landed harder than any insult Evelyn had lobbed all night. Because that's what this was to him. Not a betrayal. Not a dismissal. Just another one of Jana's moments. A thing to de-escalate. "Sure," I said. "Let's not fight." He reached for my hand. I let him hold it. And I hated how small it made me feel. I stared down at the garden lights until they blurred. Not from tears, just from exhaustion. I wasn't the girl who needed to prove herself anymore. But somehow, in this family, I still ended up cast as the antagonist. The disruptor. The one who made things complicated. Matthew leaned his head against mine. It should have felt comforting. But all I could think was, how easy it was for him to ask for peace when he wasn't the one bleeding. Below us, Evelyn raised a glass again. Another toast, another line about tradition and excellence. She never looked up. She didn't have to. She knew I was watching. And she knew I wouldn't leave. Not yet. The hallway was dark except for a single sconce above the linen cabinet. I sat on the bench beside the balcony door, heels on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. I wasn't crying. Not yet. But I could feel the old version of myself, sharp-voiced, high-strung, always trying to explain why she deserved to be in the room, rattling her chains. And I thought of the thing no one knew. The story I wasn't supposed to tell. The clinic, the lawsuit, the silence I signed. 2 years ago, when a data breach threatened to expose thousands of patient records from Evelyn's clinic, Matthew had just introduced me to the family as serious. He didn't know the full scope of what happened. Neither did Evelyn, not at first. But a former contractor had looped me in through a mutual contact, panicked, out of options, afraid. He showed me the files, the timestamps, the back door in their patient system that had gone unnoticed for months. I remember the pit in my stomach, the risk, the headlines that would follow if it got out. Caraway Clinic compromised. I could have ignored it. I wasn't on payroll. I wasn't part of the family. But I didn't. I contacted a legal friend in confidence, drafted the language, sent a summary report, scrubbed of identifying names, to Evelyn's legal team anonymously. Then I brokered a settlement. Quiet. Clean. The breach never went public. No patients were harmed. The contractor walked away. The clinic kept its reputation. And I signed an NDA. Didn't ask for credit. Didn't even tell Matthew. Because at the time, I thought that's what you did when you wanted to belong to a family like his. You cleaned up the messes and disappeared before anyone knew they'd happened. You helped without proof. You sacrificed without applause. And now, sitting here, replaying every slight, every smirk, every time Evelyn looked through me like I was temporary, I wondered if that was the moment I broke myself open. The moment I said, "You matter less than their comfort." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the USB drive I'd carried with me for months, the only remaining copy of the sealed agreement. I ran my thumb along its edge, still not sure if I wanted to burn it or use it. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt loaded. And they had no idea what was coming. I stood in front of them with the necklace in my hand. Again. Not to prove anything. Not anymore. But because I needed to finish what I started. Amanda was laughing with two friends near the dessert table, holding a flute of Prosecco like it had never slipped from her fingers. The room was warm now, full of candlelight and cake. Evelyn leaned on the mantel, one hand resting delicately on her wineglass, eyes half-lidded and always watching. I stepped closer and raised my voice just enough. "Before the night winds down," I said, steady, not smiling, "I'd like to say something properly." Conversations dimmed. Glasses lowered. Amanda turned, brows lifted, still glowing under her birthday crown. I met her eyes. "This necklace belonged to your grandmother. I had it restored. Not redesigned, not reimagined, restored. Every piece sourced from the original archive, every chip polished, every fault preserved." I held it up, let it catch the light. She wore this to her engagement party, her son's graduation, and, according to Matthew, the birth of every grandchild, including you. Amanda's smile faltered slightly. Her friends went quiet beside her. "I wanted to give this to you tonight not as a performance but as a gesture. Not because I'm trying to impress anyone. God knows that ship's been set on fire. But because family legacies don't live in press releases or party favors. They live in the things we keep. The things we repair." I crossed the room slowly, heels clicking like punctuation. And I thought this was worth repairing. I placed the necklace gently into her hand. Amanda stared down at it like it was made of questions. There was a pause. The kind that buzzes in your teeth. Then, polite applause. Short. Confused. Someone cleared their throat. Amanda looked up. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's beautiful." I nodded once. "It is." I didn't glance at Evelyn. Didn't need to. But I felt the room tilt. Not in my favor, just off its axis. As I stepped back into the cluster of guests, Matthew caught my eye. Pride, maybe. Or relief. I wasn't sure which was worse. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. I waited until everyone was seated for the first course. Some sort of beet carpaccio stacked like a sculpture, before I slipped away from my table. The gift table sat like a forgotten shrine in the far corner of the ballroom, behind a column wrapped in fairy lights and faux ivy. It overflowed with decadence, sleek gift bags stuffed with designer tissue paper, a wrapped bottle of Louis XIII, a leather-bound volume of something expensive and unreadable. A symphony of thoughtlessness. I pulled the scrapbook from my clutch slowly, careful not to wrinkle the edges. The linen wrapping was plain by comparison, the card tied with a simple piece of cream ribbon. But it was heavier than any of the boxes stacked around it. I stared at it for a second. Not for drama, not for doubt, for reverence. And then I placed it carefully in the center of the table. Not buried, not pushed to the side, front and center, where it belonged. The card on top was handwritten, block letters so there'd be no mistaking it. To the real hostess. I stepped back and stared at it like it might explode. It didn't, of course. It just sat there. Quiet. Like me. But it radiated something. Truth, maybe? Or proof. Evidence of a life lived in service and silence, finally being set down. I turned and walked away before anyone could ask questions or lift the ribbon. As I slipped back to my table, my heart beat a little louder than the jazz trio's brushed snare. No one looked up. No one noticed. But I had planted something, not a confrontation, a seed. It might be ignored. It might even be discarded. But it was there. And soon I'd speak the words to match it. Matthew found me pacing outside the kitchen, blazer folded over my arm like armor I didn't wear fast enough. "They're in the study," he said, voice low. "If you still want to, try. Try." Like this was an audition I hadn't already passed and failed in the same breath. But I nodded. The sitting room, Evelyn called a study, looked like it had never hosted a single page of actual work. Leather-bound books lined the shelves, untouched, perfectly spaced. A decanter sat on a side table next to matching glasses no one ever drank from. Evelyn stood by the fireplace, arms crossed with two board members from the clinic in matching navy blazers. This was her arena now. Matthew stayed at the door. I stepped in. "I wanted to formally present Neurotask," I said evenly, sliding my tablet from my bag. "It's a digital platform tailored to reduce admin load in clinics, particularly private practices like yours." I saw one of the men nod. The other leaned forward slightly. I pulled up the pilot data, the user testimonials, the dashboard interface. Every screen crisp, every stat clean. "There's a reason physician burnout is at an all-time high," I said. "Your staff spends 40% of their time on clerical work. We can cut that in half." The room was quiet. Then Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Jana," she said, the name like a sigh of inconvenience. "I appreciate the effort, but Caraway Clinic has functioned with excellence for decades. We don't need another digital patch to distract from actual care." One of the board members opened his mouth like he might say something, then closed it again. Evelyn smiled at me, soft and final. "Not everything can be solved with software and ambition, especially when the ambition feels misplaced." She was good. No raised voice, no insult, just enough ice in each word to turn a room to frost. I could feel Matthew flinch behind me, but he said nothing. I nodded. Slowly. "Of course," I said, sliding the tablet back into my bag. I wouldn't want to distract from legacy. I didn't look back as I left the room, because I didn't need to see Evelyn's face to know exactly what was on it. Satisfaction. And fear. Because if there's one thing people like her hate more than disruption, it's the kind that doesn't ask permission. And I was done asking. I didn't mean to end up back on the balcony, but my body moved there like it remembered where to hide. The crowd noise had dimmed to a dull throb, half champagne, half sycophancy, and I needed somewhere that didn't smell like rose petals and power. I kicked off my heels again, dropped the blazer beside the railing, and sank into the old iron chair like I'd been living in it for years. The cool air felt like absolution. And then the door creaked. Matthew stepped out slowly, closing it behind him like he wasn't sure if I'd let him stay. I didn't speak. Neither did he. He stood beside me, looking out at the garden again, fingers tapping rhythm on the railing. "I'm sorry," he said eventually. I didn't look at him. For what? For how she spoke to you, for the pitch, for all of it. I nodded, not at the apology, at the fact that he didn't know which thing hurt more. "She dismissed me," I said, flat, like I offered a scam in a Groupon email. "I know. And you let her?" That made him flinch. I didn't let. He stopped himself, rewound. "I didn't know what to say. You never do." "I didn't know what to say. You never do." That silence again. heavy, familiar. He tried again. Can we please not turn this into a fight? Not tonight? There it was, that phrase again. Can we not fight? Not, I believe you. Not, she was wrong. Not, you deserve better. Just peace. Silence over truth. I turned to him slowly. I'm not asking you to fight with me, Matthew. I'm asking you to see me. He opened his mouth, closed it. And that was worse than any argument. Because I realized he didn't know how. He knew how to love me in private. How to hold my hand when no one was looking. How to text me proud emojis after I pitched to investors. But when the family turned cold, he became room temperature. And I was done warming him up. I think I need a moment alone, I said, voice quiet but steady. He hesitated, then nodded. The door clicked shut behind him. And I exhaled so slowly it hurt. Because nothing was louder than being alone next to someone who should have stood beside you. The party raged on below. But up here, I had the only thing I hadn't been given all night. A moment that was mine. From the balcony, I could hear everything. The party hadn't lost a beat. Laughter curled up from the garden like smoke. Music swelled low and warm, and then Evelyn's voice rose above it all. Clear, controlled, deadly. I just want to thank you all, she said, clinking her glass, for being here to celebrate a woman who truly represents the future of this family. I didn't have to look to know Amanda was beaming. I didn't have to guess who was being edited out. She's brilliant, Evelyn continued. Grounded. A woman who understands that legacy isn't just something we inherit, it's something we protect. A soft round of applause. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the railing. Tonight isn't just about a birthday, Evelyn said, voice turning, syrup sweet. It's about honoring what's made our family strong, stability, tradition, and medical excellence. I felt the air leave my lungs. She said it without blinking, without needing to say my name. Because that was the point. I wasn't the mistake, I was the threat. And Evelyn Caraway was reinforcing the walls around her kingdom. Guests clinked glasses again, toasted with practiced enthusiasm. Amanda said something I couldn't hear. Evelyn laughed lightly in response, her hand brushing the necklace in Amanda's lap like it was just a pretty trinket and not a 6-month labor of care. It was strategic. Deliberate. She wasn't just reclaiming the narrative, she was erasing mine. And for a second, I almost let her. Almost believed what I always feared, that I was the one who didn't belong. But then, I remembered the clinic. The settlement. The risk I took to protect a family that wouldn't even let me finish a toast without questioning my motives. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about being accepted anymore, this was about being remembered. And I was done being the deleted scene. Below, Evelyn smiled like she'd just sealed the night in gold leaf. Above, I stood still. Quiet, watching, calculating. Because the next voice that filled that room wouldn't be hers. Not for long. The knock wasn't loud, just enough to cut through cake forks and background jazz. I watched from the top of the stairs as one of the caterers answered the door. Polite murmurs followed, and then a ripple passed through the party like someone had dropped ice in a warm bath. Mr. Benton. Caraway Clinic's legal counsel. In a tailored navy suit, glasses sharp enough to slice through pretense, he stepped inside like a man who knew he didn't get invited to parties, but always left remembered. Evelyn's expression didn't move, but I saw it. That fractional delay in her blink. The breath she didn't take. He spotted her immediately and offered a small nod. Apologies for the interruption. I need just a moment of the room's time. The murmur returned, curious now, uneasy. Amanda looked up from her dessert. Is something wrong? Benton gave the kind of corporate smile that means everything and nothing. No, no. Just something that recently became unsealed. I was instructed to notify all relevant parties. I thought, given the context, it was best to do it here. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice still velvet. This isn't a boardroom, Mr. Benton. This is my daughter's birthday celebration. I understand, he replied smoothly. And I won't take long. Matthew was standing now too, unsure whether to intervene or sit down. The guests looked around, confused. Intrigued. The lawyer turned to the room. Some of you may recall a pending liability matter involving Caraway Clinic about 2 years ago. It never went public. That's because it was resolved quietly, thanks to the negotiation and mediation of a third party. He opened a thin folder. Pages crisp. Stamped. The terms were sealed at the time, but as of yesterday, under Clause 14A, the agreement is now public record. I took one step down the stairs. The room followed me like a magnet. Benton continued. The party who arranged this, without compensation or publicity, was Ms. Jana Baker. Every sound in the room stopped. Every glass, every fork, every polite mask. Frozen. Evelyn didn't speak. Didn't move. Amanda's lips parted in a slow, stunned breath. Matthew turned, fully now. His eyes finding mine with something between shock and shame. Mr. Benton held up a page. She personally prevented a data breach lawsuit that could have cost the clinic its operating license. And she signed a full NDA. Never sought credit, never disclosed a word. The silence snapped under the weight of disbelief. And into that silence I walked. Slowly, steadily, barefoot. Because now I didn't need heels to be heard. I didn't rush, didn't flinch, didn't smile. I walked straight into the center of the room like I had every right to be there, because I did, Mr. Benton's voice carried behind me, calm and deliberate. The records show that Jana Baker coordinated between internal security teams, external counsel, and the affected contractor. The issue was resolved without legal fallout, without PR backlash, and without damage to the clinic's standing. Gasps now. Someone muttered, "Wait, what?" I didn't turn toward the sound. I turned toward Evelyn. She was still, like a statue on the verge of cracking. Her diamond pin caught the light, but her face held nothing. Not denial, not anger, just recalibration. Amanda's eyes had gone wide. Her hand was still clutching the necklace, but now it looked heavier, like it burned in her palm. I stopped just short of Evelyn's rug-lined perimeter. "Is that true?" someone asked from the back of the room. Mr. Benton nodded once. "Every word." Then I spoke. "I never told anyone because it wasn't about recognition," I said quietly, but every ear strained to catch it. It was about protecting something that mattered to the people I care about. Even if they never cared about me. A hush fell again. Not polite this time, not strategic. Genuine silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Amanda stood. She didn't say a word. Just crossed the room slowly, eyes never leaving me, and held the necklace out. Not with guilt, not with pity, just with the knowledge that everything had changed. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said. I didn't take the necklace. I didn't need to. Because the truth was already hanging in the air like crystal dust. And Evelyn? She took a single step back. Just one. But enough. Because for the first time all night, maybe ever, she wasn't leading. She was watching. And I wasn't invisible anymore. No one moved. Even the servers stopped mid-pour, holding crystal pitchers over half-filled glasses. The hum of jazz in the background felt almost mocking, like the party didn't realize it had ended. Mr. Benton adjusted his glasses and spoke once more, quieter this time, but every syllable cut like glass. There were other firms who would have taken that breach public. Who would have made headlines and shredded reputations. But Ms. Baker didn't just prevent that. She refused compensation, declined press, and signed a full waiver that protected this family's clinic and its name. The air shifted. Matthew looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Evelyn, always polished, always 4 steps ahead, stood rooted, hands clasped so tightly I could see the blood leave her knuckles. Amanda just stared at me, the necklace hanging loose from her fingers now, no longer beautiful, just heavy with context. Someone whispered, "She saved the clinic," and suddenly the room was full of voices. Low. Bewildered. Soft curses under breath. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The weight of what I'd carried was finally unburdened, not by confession, but by fact. No one could spin it. No one could say it was performative. Because when you protect someone in silence, you strip away every accusation of strategy. Evelyn's voice, when it finally came, was nothing like the one she'd used in her toasts or critiques. It was raw, fragile around the edges. You never said anything." I met her eyes. "Steady." I wasn't supposed to. Why? She asked. Why would you do that? The room leaned in. Not to my voice, to the truth. I let it land gently. Because your family mattered to the person I love. And because reputation isn't what you say about yourself. It's what you do when no one's watching. That silenced them again. But not with discomfort. With clarity. Matthew stepped forward. I didn't move toward him, he didn't reach for me, he just stood beside me this time. Finally. Not shielding, not shrinking, just present. And Evelyn? She sat down, not gracefully, not strategically, just sat. As if the gravity of what she'd missed had finally become too heavy to stand above. And for the first time, the party wasn't about Amanda. It wasn't about legacy. It was about truth. And that truth had a name, mine. It didn't happen all at once. There was no standing ovation, no tearful apology, just a quiet turning of heads, a recalibration. One by one, they looked at me. Some with curiosity, others with dawning respect, a few with the slow shame of people realizing they'd laughed at the wrong joke for too long. Amanda stood by the fireplace now, the necklace fastened around her neck. But she wasn't playing dress-up anymore. She wore it like a weight. Like a question. Evelyn remained seated, spine still stiff, but the mask had cracked. Her hands rested in her lap now, not folded in superiority. Just still. I felt Matthew shift beside me. His voice came low, only loud enough for me to hear. You never told me. I didn't look at him. It wasn't about me. He exhaled. A breath that sounded like something breaking. Or healing. Maybe both. Then he took my hand. And for once, not in private. Not in apology. But in acknowledgement. The guests didn't interrupt. No clinking glasses. No polite deflections. Just eyes. On me. On the woman they'd underestimated. The woman who had never stopped standing, even when they'd tried to sit her down. A few people nodded, almost imperceptibly. A ripple through the crowd like wind through leaves. One of Evelyn's board members raised his glass. Not high, not loud, but intentionally. To doing the right thing, he said. The words hung there, unclaimed. I didn't toast back. But I stood straighter. Because sometimes you don't need to be celebrated. You just need to stop being questioned. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, no one asked me to explain why I was here. They just saw me. And that was enough. For now. I was making my way toward the front hall, heels in one hand, pulse finally settling, when I heard her voice. Soft, unarmored. Jana. I turned. Evelyn stood alone by the parlor doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame like it was the only thing holding her up. She didn't summon me with a gesture. She asked, "Could we speak?" The room behind her was empty, dimly lit by a single lamp and the dying glow of dusk through sheer curtains. I paused, then nodded. She didn't step aside to let me in, she stepped back. And for the first time since I met Evelyn Caraway, she followed. The door clicked shut behind us. No witnesses, no audience, just her and me and everything we hadn't said. She sat first. Carefully. Palms on her knees, head slightly bowed. I remained standing, not to tower over her, just to remind myself I could. I owe you an apology, she said. The words didn't fall easily. They arrived like something pulled from deep underground. I didn't know what you did for the clinic. I didn't know what you gave up. You didn't want to, I said. Not cruelly, just truth. She nodded. Slowly. Maybe. Yes. We sat in the silence of that admission for a long time. I've always been afraid of variables, she said, voice small now. Uncontrolled things. Things that don't fit into the story I've written about this family. And I was the messy subplot? Her lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Just recognition. You were the one I didn't write, and I resented that. I let that sit. I thought you were a risk, she said finally. But the truth is, you were the one protecting us all along. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like grief. But also, maybe, peace. You didn't have to protect us, she whispered. Especially not me. I wasn't doing it for you. She nodded again. I know. Then she looked up. Really looked at me. and something behind her eyes cracked just enough to let me see the woman underneath. Not the gatekeeper, not the ice queen, just a woman who had finally realized the cost of her control. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time it sounded like she meant it, and that was enough, for now. We sat in silence after her apology. Not awkward, not tense, just new. Like the air between us had shifted molecules. Evelyn stared at her hands, turning her wedding band slowly around her finger. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. Unpolished. "I've always believed in systems," she said. "In what can be measured, managed. That's how I built the clinic. Why it's still standing." I said nothing. She wasn't defending, she was confessing. "But I also know," she continued, "that we're past the point where paper charts and overworked admin assistants are sustainable. And if I'm being honest," she looked at me then, "you were right." It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a door unlatching. "There's a department," she said. "Cardiology. We've been buried in redundancies since Dr. Moore retired. I can't promise anything permanent. But if you're still willing." She paused, not because she doubted the words, because she meant them. "I'd like you to pilot your system. In that department, with full access, full autonomy. Your way." I studied her. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't optics. It was trust. Tentative, fragile, real. "I'll do it," I said, "but on my terms." "Of course." And not quietly. She looked at me, eyes steady. No, not quietly. That was it. No grand embrace, no dramatic music swelling in the background. Just two women, sitting in the aftermath of a war they didn't know they'd been fighting for the same side. She stood first. So did I. And when she opened the door, she didn't walk out ahead. She stepped aside. And let me lead. I stepped into the foyer barefoot. No one stared this time. No one whispered. If they looked, it wasn't with judgment. It was curiosity, respect. Maybe even something close to admiration. Amanda stood near the archway, flanked by two friends who had stopped trying to perform amusement an hour ago. The necklace hung like a quiet apology against her collarbone. She caught my eye. Gave the smallest nod. I nodded back. No need for words. Not anymore. Matthew waited by the door. Jacket in hand, shoulders squared, not with defensiveness this time but clarity. "Ready?" he asked. I slipped the blazer over my arm and glanced around once more. The house looked different now. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. It didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a building. Just walls. Just people. Just air. "I'm ready," I said. We stepped outside into the cool night, the door clicking gently behind us. No chase, no tug of guilt, just the soft wind and the gravel beneath my feet. Matthew didn't speak right away. He opened the car door, watched me slide in, then settled behind the wheel without reaching for the radio or my hand. He didn't need to say anything. He'd watched me rise, watched me hold the line, watched me become someone who no longer needed permission to stand where she was, and he knew I wasn't leaving broken. I was leaving whole. Because I hadn't won them over. I'd simply stopped needing to. The car was quiet. Not tense, not loaded, just quiet. Matthew kept his eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2 like he was driving something delicate, not just an old Audi with a shaky Bluetooth connection. I leaned my head against the window. Let the wind from the cracked passenger side swirl around my face. No music. No small talk. Just the sound of tires against pavement and a silence that felt like oxygen. He finally spoke when we reached the first light at the bottom of the hill. "You were incredible tonight." I didn't turn to look at him. Just let the words sit. "That's not why I did it," I said. "I know." We sat there, red glow washing over us. "I didn't protect your family because I wanted gratitude," I said. "I did it because someone had to." He nodded. "I should have said something sooner," he added. "I should have stepped in. Backed you. You didn't know how." He didn't argue. "You didn't argue." And I didn't need him to anymore. Because I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for him to be someone else. I'd stopped needing to be rescued the moment I realized I could save myself. The light turned green. The car moved forward. Outside, the city spread below us, soft and breathing. Inside, I closed my eyes, not out of weariness, but peace. Not everything had healed, not everything had changed, but I had. And that was enough to start over, even if I never went back. The sun was just beginning to rise when I stepped through my front door. Everything was quiet. Not heavy, just still. My apartment looked the same. The stack of investor notes on the counter. The half-folded laundry draped over the arm of the couch. The ceramic mug I forgot to rinse still sitting by the sink. But it all felt different. I set my heels down by the door, draped my blazer over the back of the chair, stood in the center of the room and just breathed. No performance, no audience, just me. The woman who had once begged to be let in was gone. In her place was someone who didn't knock anymore, who built her own damn door. I moved to the window, the skyline unfolding in soft streaks of gold and gray. The city hadn't changed, the world hadn't shifted, but I had. I reached for my laptop, opened the dashboard for Neurotask. New user signups, a pending email from one of Evelyn's board members. A meeting request flagged urgent. The work was still waiting, but now, it was mine. All of it. I typed one message. Just one. Ready to begin. Then I hit send. And as the first light filled the room, I sat down. Barefoot. Calm. Whole. Not because they had accepted me, but because I finally had.